Okay. Yes. There we
Hello, Dean.
go. Okay.
Got it?
Sorry about that. Sometimes it's like glitches or something. Normally, yeah, I'm not sure why it took so long, but apologies.
Oh, no, good. We're good to go.
How are you? Can you see me okay? I can hear you and see you perfectly.
Yeah, I can see you fine.
All right, fantastic. All right, thank you everybody who's jumping in. Last time I had Tom on, he basically went over his past, his history, his journey, which include Russia. From there, he touched upon, what AMOK means and all that, the brotherhood, and how he differentiated from the martial arts. But we didn't really get into his methodology yet, which we're going to start. And when we had to leave last time, we just started going into the six main features. I don't know if that's an area you would like to begin on.
Sure, we got to just touch base a little bit on how the organizational structure is different, and then we'll jump right into the methodology.
Okay. The other thing I just wanted, and before we get you started, sir, well, first off, welcome. Thank you for coming on again. Your first video, 200 hits already in a short time, which is really good. So people are obviously enjoying it and doing it. So
Great.
thank you.
And thank you for
And
having me
just
here,
somebody
Dean.
asked me my affiliation to Tom, so I just want to give just a quick historical perspective. 3 years ago, Tom advertised a bob for sale, and it was the best $180 I ever spent. 150 for the bob, 30 for gas and incidentals. So I go up there. I'm just expecting I'm going to give Tom 150. He's going to give me the bob, and I'm going to be going my way home.
No such luck.
But Tom was very pleasant. Asked me, "Hey, do you got a few minutes? I can show you something." And I'm like, anybody who's willing to share their time with me and all that, I'm willing to listen. That's just something I've been brought up with. So, and I'm so glad I did, because that, again, it's about 3 years ago in a couple of weeks thereabouts. But it was a fantastic. He basically put on the board his method and all that, and I was immediately sold. Never saw anything or heard anything of that nature. Went home, signed up. So I'm hoping after the post this, I'm going to give Tom's website information, all that, and hopefully you guys will experience what I experienced and want to join and all that. So that's hoping what we're going to achieve here with having you on here again, exposure. But what a 3 years it's been.
Hmm.
I tell everybody, like, obviously you're my teacher, but you're my mentor, and compare and contrast how to look at things, how to differentiate things, as far as methods, how to achieve the utmost functionality. And I think it's fair enough to say after those time too, we kind of become good friends.
Right on, for certain. For
So with
certain.
that being said, I'm going to let you jump in there. So whatever you want to tackle first.
Well, just briefly, the organizational structure of a mock, rather than being a pyramid with practitioners on the bottom and then instructors and then masters and grandmasters, because we don't have any rank or any such thing. Our organizational structure is more like a funnel, where our job as instructors and trainers is to help people get up through that core stem up into the cone. And that core stem would be the core skills. And then they can branch out in different directions. It's always there to support them, never to contain them. They can grow and develop in as high as they want, and they're free to step out and to go into other things, which we've always encouraged they should continue doing. Rather than the pyramid type structures, which tend to contain people and over time tend to fracture and explode. So ours is just an inverse of that. So much in the same way that our method of training is absolutely reverse of pretty much what everybody else does.
Yeah, that's what immediately, like when I saw that, when you set that up the day I referred to buying the bob from you. I don't want to give stuff away because this is your time to share that, but I was immediately just captivated just because I never had seen anything like that reversal, which you're referring to.
Before we jump into that, I'd like to just briefly address something about people's values. Because on the spectrum of martial arts, on one end, you have strict traditionalists, and on the other end, you have strict functionalists. And everywhere in between, you have enthusiasts. And the difference between them is that the strict traditionalist has no choice about how he trains. His art is much like an artifact, like if you found an old vase and you wanted to polish it up and take care of it, and if it was broken, you wouldn't fix it because that would ruin its value if you had a 2,000-year-old vase and you just wanted to save it. And so you would polish that and save that and give it to the next generation. So traditional martial arts are like that. They polish their techniques, they try to pass it on as intact as they can to the next generation. And that's how it maintains its value. And of course, a vase that might have been valuable 2,000 years ago that's cracked a little bit right now might not still hold water and be good to put flowers in, or as a canteen to head out into the desert, but it still has great value differently, maybe even more so than its original value because of its value as an art. So those people have no choice on how they train. On the other end of the spectrum are functionalists like ourselves. And a functionalist in AMOK, our prime directive is that we must be constantly be seeking greater functionality. And when we discover
Hmm.
it, we must adapt it and adopt it. We don't get to say, oh, but we like doing that other thing. Well, look, the task is demanding us to approach it a certain way. And so we don't just get to throw our opinion on there. And we feel that the driving difference for that is because when it comes to knife work, people's lives are at stake. And so when people's lives are at stake, they expect you to teach them the very best of what you know, not second best, not good enough, but the very best. So
Amen.
that's our driving value, and that's why we have no choice about it. And it's what has driven the forward evolution of AMOK into greater functionality, and will continue along that path because that's our prime directive. And as well,
Great, especially.
every trainer who comes to AMOK, when if they are shown something and they believe that they know a more functional way or a better way to approach it, they have a duty to bring it to us so that we can all look at it and put it into the lab and decide if that's the way that should become the new standard or the new way of moving forward, and let the old way be another variation or completely discarded potentially. And this is the way
I just
that
want to capitalize on that because I think that mindset is phenomenal, fantastic, because it's a breath of fresh air. I don't know many systems or teachers or head of or et cetera, that are willing to do that or do that. And so I think that is just incredible that you have that mindset and that you instill it in all of us. Just great stuff.
Thank you. And part of that is by not having any rank and title, because rank and title means there is something to be gotten other than skill and brotherhood. And not
Right.
necessarily, but most often we find that rank and title begins to hijack those two things over skill and brotherhood. Oh, what's my next belt? What's my next level? And what do I have to do to achieve this or that? And it's not about functionality and that increased functionality over time. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's where a mock is different from from martial arts, because we're not a martial art. Okay, we're a method of self-protection. And while there's some overlap, there are some very, very different things about it.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
And just to touch on what you said, it's so true, like with the brotherhood and that, because when you look at some of the systems that you referred to regarding, not there's anything wrong with those particular systems as a whole, but in regards to the belts and all that, it just creates separation. You know what I mean? It just, and I never felt that with anybody, in a mock. Nobody, everybody was very approachable, very friendly, like, true. And as I mentioned in the last episode, just how when I have, Guru Dave come up, most of the people, the biggest support I get from is from Amok people,
right on. Yeah,
So
well,
yeah, good job.
AMOKs are all about functionality, and we're kind of like the black sheep we all gather in the same pasture once in a while to train together, and then we go back to being the black sheep wherever we are. So we're like a collection of black
Hey,
sheep in that regard.
I'll
But
take it.
that's how the method is different. I mean, that's how the structure is different, and our values are different. And that's why I've had some guys come to me and say, "Well, I want to become more functional." And then when I show them what they have to do, and then they kind of like, "Oh yeah, but we kind of like doing those other things." No, or they say, "My guys like doing those other drills." I go, "Wait a minute, they like it because that's what you showed them. If you went back excited about these kind of
Uh,
activities, they'd be excited to do
right.
those too. But usually it's because then they'd have to do the
Mm.
work and they wouldn't have compliant training partners. They'd actually having to be fighting their own guys. And so a lot of guys don't like to do that. You know,
Yeah, they don't want to change things up, or
or
yeah,
they
have
don't
to go
want to be
back to the
put to the
students
test
again.
by their own guys. All
Oh, by
right.
their own.
Well, because
Yeah.
don't forget,
No.
you know, a guy comes in and you're the master and you've got the rank. What are you going to do? Get up and duel and he beats
Mm.
you? And then he's supposed to call you master the rest of the day?
I
Right. So
know.
that's
That's why I think
why,
they put themselves on the shelves.
well, that's the problem. Falling hurts least those who fly low. So when we get up, we all get in a
Oh.
circle, we all fight each other. Everyone dies ultimately, okay? Everyone gets
Mm.
hit. So it's not a matter of, oh, you can't get me, or I'm untouchable, or there's some excuse, or it becomes a challenge, or whatever
Yeah.
else gets in the way of training.
No,
Well,
and I tell people that like you jump in it. You're in there. You're not sitting on a pedestal, giving orders and all that. I mean, you're in it. You know what I mean? So you lead, obviously, in my opinion, exemplary example of leading by example. You know, so
Well, the activities force it from you because it's the only way in which we come together for our activities. And that's how we are, I would say, mainly different from everybody else. And so separate
hmm
from our values is our approach. And I could kind of explain it this way. In most martial arts, you come in and you train, which let's just use some generalized examples. And of course, if this doesn't apply to you and your method, don't be overly offended, okay? Only the offended are guilty on this. So most methods, when you come in, you start with training. Oh, here's my strikes and here's some footwork, and you learn how to move. And then they set you up and you do some practice drills. And then in the end, you get to fight a little bit. Now that's the equivalent of saying, well, you're going to have basketball footwork. I'm going to teach you some football plays, and then you're going to play a soccer game. That a lot of
a nice
times
analogy.
what's happening in those basics aren't matching what's happening in the practice, and that doesn't really match what's happening in the game. That the movement is not the same, the dynamics are not the same, and there's all kinds of double talk about, oh, well, it helps you this way and that. And I've heard all the double talk for, look, I've been training for 50 years. I've heard most of all that double talk. in
Yeah,
the
no,
in
I'm
the
sure.
end in the end it defies sports science when your training for movement doesn't match the practice that you're using, and when the dynamics of practice don't match the game, so to speak. What you have are big disconnects, functional disconnects. Why would you have basketball footwork with football plays to play a soccer game? So
Right.
what I did with AMOK was, after a while, and I began to notice this in so many of the different methods, whether it was Japanese or Chinese or Filipino or whatever, there was this training, practice, fighting progression within which there was a disconnect between those activities. So what we did is we said, well, you know what? Let's just throw it all away. Let's just fight. Let's just keep fighting and let's see what happens, what holds and what doesn't. So what we did is we just kept playing soccer, so to speak. And every time we scored a
Yeah.
goal, we'd say, well, how did we do that? And the plays began to appear. And as soon as you know what's required of you in a play of yourself, well, you kind of go home and you work on that on your own. And so the training that supports that began to appear. And over time, we reverse engineered so that it's truly fight based. So that sometimes, whether you're fighting or practicing or even training, somebody who doesn't know which activity we're doing might not even be able to distinguish between them. Almost all of AMOK is
Yeah.
done in fighting mode, and I'll explain further about that as we go on.
Fantastic. That's something there, like, and of course, in many conversations with you, I mean, all these topics have been touched on, but like, I met 2 weeks ago with the guys. I mentioned that on the my classes, that if somebody were to walk in, just that very point, that they would not be able to discriminate what you were doing, whether it be practice and all that, because of the authenticity and all that, which I don't want to. I want to, allow for you to jump in all that, but yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Well, in a way too, the game is almost like, if we could compare it to playing water polo in a raging river. And most people that are like advocates of flow drills, that's the equivalent of being on a volleyball court, and we help each other volley it back and forth, and then you set it up for me and I spike it down at some reference point. And then when you get into the real game, you have difficulty because you don't really know how to swim. You can't keep your head above water. And those dynamics don't allow those volleyball techniques to work the same way. All those reference points are gone, and all of that stuff you're supposed to adapt to is just gone. So there's a reason why we've reverse engineered our training the way we have, and why there are
Right.
certain elements that are so important. So the
And
first thing
it is.
the first thing I would want to talk to you about then is what are the elements of our activities that become so important that most other people,
Okay.
I believe, don't get right. And because of that, it upsets their functionality. Now, let me say right off the bat, there's a lot of guys who become great fighters in other methods. What I would say is if they used all those same techniques, but our methods of training, they would be an even greater fighter.
Wow.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Powerful
So,
stuff.
well, somebody at a seminar said to me once, if I asked if I knew who Mr. Salite was, and I said yes, and they said, well, if he were
Oh, I
alive
remember
today,
this.
if he were alive today, do you think you could beat him? I said, not a chance. They said, well, why aren't you doing that? And I said, well, I think if he used my method, he would beat me even faster.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
And that's saying,
So,
yeah.
so it's not about the
Remember
content. It's
that.
not about the techniques that you're doing. It's the means of integration. Bruce Lee said, don't imitate or accumulate, but integrate. So then if I say, well, okay, well,
Absolutely.
separate from all the drills and whether you're doing a puck saw or lop saw or whatever, without talking about the specifics of drills, what's the means of integration? So if somebody gives you a technique or an idea, how do you integrate that skill? And most people think, well, it's through doing the repetitions and then building it into the technique, and they're wrong. And I'll tell you why. Repetition is only going to get you so far, and we're going to come back to that. First off, I believe that in the AMOK activities, they need to have three things. Number one is authenticity, two is proper context, and three is being deliberate. And let me explain what I mean by that. When you're fighting with somebody and you are in the mode of actually fighting with them, that's a spontaneous event. You must remain 100% attentive to them and adapt from moment to moment to moment. That is the nature of the event itself. And if you take your eyes off them and look away or close your eyes or drift away in a distraction, you're going to get smashed. You have to remain
Correct.
100% attentive. So I believe that our activities need for us to be spontaneous, adaptive, and attentive. And if those three elements of authenticity are lacking, then likely you are not in the right mindset at all or in the right state of awareness, that you're doing things that are outside of the state of awareness that you're going to be in when you need to be doing them. Again, those other practices are somehow dry. You're not even the least bit wet. So
Mm,
authenticity to me tells me, how deep in the water are you? Are you in the water here, or are you sprinkling some on you, if at all? So
right.
authenticity is the number one thing. And the second thing is context. Now context is really important because you have to know what activity you're in, what tactics you're using, and what's the purpose. I'll give you an example. I once had a guy come up to me and go, "Oh, do you know how the who bud?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I do." And I don't really like flow drill things, but he said, "Well, will you do it with me for a second? There's something I want to show you." And I said, "Well, sure." So I stepped up to do the drill with him, and as soon as I did, he poked me and he went, "Gotcha!" And I'm like, "What do you mean you got me?" I thought
Oh,
this
no.
is a sensitivity drill, and to him, he thought he was in opposition, like it was some strange form of sparring, and he got the better of me. So I said, well, that's
Okay.
interesting. I said, well, show me again. And as we stepped up to the drill, I just punched him. And he goes, well, that's not the drill. I go, well, neither is what you did. So it shows you that the content in his mind, the context was one thing when clearly it's another. So if you get it wrong, if
Right.
you don't know what that is, it's like getting a puzzle piece and not knowing where it goes because you haven't seen the picture itself. So if I give you a red piece and you're like, well, what do I do with that? You're going to look for every place and then go, oh, it doesn't even work, and throw it away. But if you had seen that was a
Right, right,
farm
right.
scene where it was a green grass, blue sky, brown cows, and a red barn, well, you get the red piece, you know that goes to the barn, and you know where it doesn't go. So context is very, very important, and a lot of people get that wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
So so you're starting to get into now the deliberateness. So is that where you want to go next, sir?
Yeah, and
Or
then
do you want?
well, the third element that's important is number one, you have to have authenticity so that your mindset is there, and that the content and that the correct dynamics are there. The context so that you know what you're doing and you know what your purpose is. And I'm going to draw another example on that later. But the third element that's really important is being deliberate, and that's the biology of skill development. And when I learned this, it changed everything in AMOK, and it significantly changed how we do our practice drills. In fact, after making all the core skills, I had to go back and redo them all over again and shoot all new videos. And here's
Due to your recent regarding deliberateness,
yes,
is that
when I found out what is the biology of skill development, and that is in deliberateness, then I had to go back and make all of our activities deliberate. And let me explain to you what
okay?
deliberate means and why that is so important, and why repetition alone does not build skill. If somebody says, well, doesn't repetition build skill? I say, only the deliberate ones. And here's how we can tell the
Hmm.
difference.
Interesting.
Imagine if you went to the beach and we both had a hammer and I said, well, we're going to break rocks. So you've stopped breaking rocks and I'm breaking rocks, and there's no timing to it. There's no purpose to it. It may or may not be fun. So if we take one of those two elements of timing or purpose and say, well, let's add timing to it. I break a rock, you break a rock. I break a rock, you break a rock. Well, now we have timing, but no purpose. And it may or may not be more fun. But you're not really achieving anything. It's just you're having fun.
Yeah.
Now, whether we have timing or not, if we add purpose and say, well, how about if when we start breaking rocks, we make a pile of small rocks and we see who can make the bigger pile of small rocks. So now you have purpose. So you take a rock and you smash it up, and you take another rock and you smash it up, and pretty soon you have a pile of small rocks. Okay, well, now you've produced something. Well, what if you add timing and production? Get a rock, break it, get a rock, break it, get a rock, break it, get a rock, break it. If you do these things, like running your drills, your repetition drills, well, now you'll get a big pile of small rocks, okay? You've produced a lot. But the problem with that is that as you become an automaton, you're not really becoming any better of a rock breaker. You're just doing more repetitions out the other end, but you yourself are not becoming more skillful as a rock breaker. Now, if I then said, and here's where it gets exciting, hey, I'm going to put a rock down, and each time you get to hit it only once and break it into as many different pieces as you can. And as I start putting rocks down that are round, you're going to eye it out and learn to smash it. And if I put one down that's oval, you'll eye it out and smash it. And one that's a little bit pyramid, you eye that out and then you smash it. And each and every time, you have to very deliberately eye that out and smash it. And if you keep doing that, it's irrelevant the size of the small pile of rocks that you develop. What's important is that you did become a better and better rock breaker.
Ah, gotcha.
All right.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
now here's why that's important to biology and for skill development. And it's understanding this that helps you break plateaus. So there's some real gold here. When you're doing your repetitions, imagine when you were a baby and you wanted to learn how to walk. As you take your first steps, you're a little bit unsure. Your foot goes forward and you take the step and you're a little bit shaky. And every time you very deliberately step. Now, here's the deal.
Yeah.
When you begin walking, your brain sends a stream of signals down the neural pathways down to the muscles to tell them to move. But in the beginning, those neural pathways are very new, kind of raw and open. And a lot of those signals jump off and they hit the other muscles, which is why the other muscles shake. And only some of them get to the muscle where it's supposed to go, which is why your step is a little bit unsure and not so strong and coordinated. However,
Interesting.
every time you make a deliberate action, the body does a special thing. It produces a substance called myelin. And myelin begins to coat that neural pathway between the brain and the muscles. All right. And the more that you act deliberately, the more that coating builds up, and it acts like an insulation. And pretty soon, as you command that thought, it runs straight through the neural pathway without jumping off, goes right to the muscles, and then you're walking naturally without thinking. So this is the biology of muscle memory, which there is no such thing. It is the development of myelin through
Ah,
deliberate action.
fascinating.
And so that is why when a person
I'm
begins,
sorry. Can
sure,
I just one quick question. I just want to make sure I understand this. So what you're saying is what people refer to as quote unquote, well, you do it enough times, now it's muscle memory, it's going to come out automatic. Well, you're saying that is actually myelin. Am I correct?
right. Every time they did it deliberately, it does build credits towards being muscle memory. But once you get that down, to continue doing those drills over and over and over by thinking, oh, I'm doing more repetitions, so I must be getting better. I'm building more muscle memory. No, you're just beating a dead horse. And no matter how much you beat it, it's not coming back to life because those movements aren't, because
Ah,
those actions aren't deliberate anymore. I'll give you another example. Imagine if your job was to pop bubbles, when people blow bubbles, and you had a machine that would blow
yeah.
bubbles. Well, if it blew them straight out and all you did was go pop, 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 hitting the bubbles, well, you're not getting better really at doing that. But if somebody blew bubbles and the wind was blowing and they were all over and you kind of had to hit the bubbles as they were floating around, you very deliberately have to hit each one, and you will become much more accurate and better at popping those bubbles. So you can see that just the mindless repetition of doing something doesn't build muscle memory. Only initially,
Okay.
only
Okay.
initially as you're learning that, and then as soon as it becomes repetitious, not deliberate, then you're off on the plateau again. And because people gained a certain amount of skill initially doing that, then they think by learning more drills, they're going to gain more skill, and they really don't. You're just adding another level of a plateau one on another. You're not building deliberate action. So these are the three things of
Fascinating.
authenticity, context, and deliberateness. And when your drills are deliberate, they're always difficult and challenging, okay? And you're always building skill.
Okay. Fascinating. Especially, wow, that whole piece on the muscle memory and all that. That was fascinating. Um, so what I got from here is somebody, I wanted to ask you about how, because a big thing you talk about is opposition in AMOK and how that's different from sparring and other methods. But is it, Jalendo asked the question, if you could go, and you might want to do this already, into the triangles.
Sure, absolutely. If you think
Okay.
of the three things that we just talked about, authenticity, context, and deliberateness, and if you think of that triangle as the base of a pyramid, and the pyramid itself is now going to have three sides. So those activities are going to be present in any one of those three sides of activities you're going to do, those elements. So the three things, number one, would be opposition, practice, and training. So training is where you're looking to develop efficient movement. That's about your own body's attributes. Practice is developing effective techniques, and that has to do with the risk to reward of the actions that you're using. Okay, it's outcome oriented. Okay, and opposition are the activities where two people are actually trying to get each other, like in sparring. Okay, so the thing is, most methods will first have you training and then practicing and then fighting. And a mock,
And then at the end, okay.
right. So it's kind of like, well, here's how you're supposed to learn how to move most effectively. And here's some drills that show you some moves. And now you got to go like wing it. And
Can
so,
I,
and so
just one more question. When you alluded to before of the disconnect, is it safe to say that this is where some of the disconnect also comes into play?
absolutely. The big disconnects come between those three activities of practice, of training and practice and opposition. So here's the deal. If you get in a fight in the street, whenever you get hit by something pretty good, when you get back to your school, what's the first thing you work on?
Oh, you got hit.
Making sure that never happens again.
Right.
Right? Experience is the best teacher and all of that. Why isn't then that the method that drives all of our training? Because if you were invincible, you wouldn't have to practice or train, would you?
Right. Correct.
Right. So how about if when we come in, we fight first, and then from having done so, we diagnose a weakness? Now in the street or in fighting, if we come in, the first thing we do is fight. Well, when you're
Yeah.
getting hit
Duel.
with
Yeah.
something, you start knowing, hey, I have a weakness over here. I need to fix this.
Yeah.
Now, if you already know how to
No,
fix
that's
it, you can set about doing that. But if you don't know how to fix it, then you'd have to discover it instead of inventing it. Now, here's the difference. Most systems, when it gets to opposition, they just do sparring. Well, we get up and we try to get each other. And maybe there's some different rules a little bit on how they try to get each other. But have you ever noticed that sometimes in some places somebody will say, hey, do you want to go some sparring? Can we just go light today? And of course, it never really
yes.
usually ends
Yes.
up staying that
Yes.
way. But
Yes.
why would somebody ask you that? And typically, somebody will ask you, can we just go light? And the reason for that is because they want to experiment with something and they really don't want to be getting their ass kicked while they're doing experiments because they're trying stuff out. So if you can both agree to dial it down a little bit from full on fighting, well, now you can afford to experiment a little bit. So in AMOK, we go full on fighting. And that's to gain experience, just like you would in the street, to learn some lessons from that, to assess your fighting
Correct.
and where you are. And from there, we can go, okay, well, wait a minute. Now that I've done that and I've diagnosed that I have a problem, I want to discover the solution. So instead of trying to invent something from my imagination, how about if we put this into a discovery process and fight this through with the dynamics so we can find out what we're supposed to do? So sparring for us is experimental. The design is for you to discover a truth, and when you do is to retest it. And when you can do this and get a consistent positive result, then you go, okay, now I know what the solution is, and might have to practice and or train to improve my performance at that solution. So sparring and fighting are different. For us, the fighting or dueling, that's about gaining experience. And sparring is an environment to experiment. So those are two different things
Okay.
with two very different purposes. Somebody watching some AMOKs that might be sparring might think they're fighting, or vice versa. So now you can see
Correct.
why context is so important. If you don't understand what is the purpose of the activity, you might completely mistake it.
Yes.
Right? Or if I then said to you, hey, can we spar for a while? And you're still fighting in your mind, you might think, well, I'm doing great today. I'm running this guy over. And you didn't know it's because he was trying stuff out. And in a way, neither of you are getting the most out of the activity because you're both there for different purpose. If I'm
Oh,
fighting,
correct.
if
Okay.
I'm fighting, the evidence of success is whether I get you, you get me, or we get each other. In the experiments and sparring, the evidence of success is whether you discovered a solution or not. Those are two very different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
You,
No, going back to what you said, you have to have established context.
right.
Yeah.
So I found
Um,
that most methods tend to conflate those activities to put them together. And because of that, they don't get the most out of doing it both ways by trying to do it simultaneously instead of separately for separate purposes.
interesting way of putting that. I like that. So, just to give another perspective on for the viewers, and I guess maybe in context of an individual, for instance. Okay, I come in, we're dueling, and you're constantly, you're getting me on my body, whether it be thrusts, whatever. We'll keep it specific. So would it be fair to say then that you would put me, knowing that I had deficiency in that area, put me in the practice, and then I'd be in the practice triangle, but in addition to that, maybe homework to train individually? Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, so not only does the method provide that, but it works as a diagnostic tool for individuals as well. So, sorry, let me click this off. So yes, absolutely. It allows us to say this person has a deficiency that we recognized when we were fighting. So if we already know the solution as an instructor, you don't have to spar. We'd say, well, okay, here's the practice for that. And for us, you can see it's pretty uh, obvious, okay? Because you'll see how
Yeah.
we practice within sparring mode. And then I'd say, and then here's what you might want to do to go home and train some of those actions to improve your body's performance at doing that movement. So there's the move, and then there's the movement. Your body is training the movement, and you practice the move. Those two things will increase your functionality. So I'll give you an example. Let's imagine that you were getting hit by combination strikes consistently. Then we could say,
Okay.
hey, let's spar for a while and isolate combination attacks. No single strikes, no fakes, no grabs. When you come at me, it has to be a hard combo. When I come at you, the same thing. Now, we're still sparring. We've just limited it to combination attacks. All right. Now, having done that, when you attack at me, I could either kind of jump away or try to hold my ground and moving offline a little bit. So maybe I would do some experiments where I would start and I would try going jump away, and see what the results were. And maybe sometimes I get you a little or we both miss a lot. Maybe I try mixing it up by going, let me jump away and then hold my ground. And with that, I go, yeah, I clip his arm and I'm getting in there. I'm getting a pretty good result from that. And then if you reversed it and said, well, let me try to hold my ground and then jump away, you'd be like, well, I'm getting hit a lot on the first strike and we miss on the second. And then if you tried the last one, hold my ground, you say, well, we're just ending up in that mutual kill. So having done those
Okay.
experiments, you say, well, that jump away and hold my ground gave me really good results. That seemed to be the high percentage moves. So now I know what I want to practice. And in
Okay.
this way, you're not going to invent a solution that's going to break down under too much pressure, because instead you didn't invent, you discovered a solution in its natural environment. And
Right. The best kind.
now you're just going to develop it.
I just want, I got a picture here for the folks that can see. They're not gonna be able to read, but just to give them a general idea of what the triangles that you're referring to on here. One's the opposition that you reference, the practice and the training, and the beginning one being the context. But just again, at the end, I'm gonna refer folks to the site where they can actually see this actually perfectly. Those who have interest.
Thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Johnny on the spot.
So that's how come, and number one, also on that triangle, the first triangle of opposition is not only is the first thing is tactics. A lot of guys talk about tactics. And here's another thing, vocabulary. How is it we can all be in the same business? And I say, could you define and then compare and contrast strategy, tactics, and techniques? And most guys cannot. And if you then say, well, can you define and compare and contrast the difference between practice and training? And most people cannot. And so if we as instructors and leaders of this can't get on the same page about the definition of the most basic terms, well, how can we really get very far in any conversation about methods? Because it'll always be apples and oranges when we're not holding the same definitions for the same words.
Because we're going to be looking at just such different perspectives,
Right,
and
because they don't understand it the
yeah,
same way. So this becomes
yeah.
its own problem. And another thing, like when you hear guys go, "Well, we teach tactical knifing." Well, how many times have you seen
He
camping
told me
gear?
that.
It's camping gear sprayed black, and they call it tactical gear and charge you twice as much. And then you hear we're teaching
Oh gosh.
tactical knifing, and then you go and it's the same old tired flow drills with reference points and techniques. And it's like, oh, okay, well that's
Oh,
interesting. Could you tell me what tactics you're going to be teaching us today? Can you list them for me and show them? So most guys cannot, and they use that word tactics. When you come into AMOK in the very first class, you identify all of the attacking and countering tactics, right? And then in the next class, you learn, okay, now that we understand those tactics, what are the consequences of doing them? That's dueling. And then so forth. And so in the first triangle, you learn all the tactics, which are deception, attacking, and counters. Okay, then you learn fighting. Okay, and then you
yeah.
learn sparring. And in this, now you start to go, well, now I have all my tools so I can fight and spar. It would suck if you were playing cards and the other guy gets 52 cards in his deck and you get 26.
Yeah.
You'd be losing because you don't know all the moves. Well, in AMOK, because you learn all the moves right up front,
Right.
then it's only about your performance in doing them. You're not losing because you didn't learn some of the
Right.
moves. So
No, and I was like that. Everybody's got an even playing field, you
right,
know.
right. And that's why
Yeah,
then the tactics are in the first triangle along with, because that's what you're using when you're fighting or sparring. And that said, now
right.
once when you did your fighting or you did your experiment sparring, well now it's time to practice. Now it's time to say I need to improve my skill at something. And that's a completely different triangle.
Correct.
That's what the
Yeah,
blue
I think the
is.
whole setup is, yeah. And then of course the green, if they needed some individual training or they self-initiated, they wanted to send it home to improve, a particular skill, what have you. I think the outlay is just fascinating. I remember again when I referenced 3 years ago, seeing that. I had never seen anything like that. I mean, it was mind blowing, And then in conjunction with hearing you talk about and explain it as you are now with it on the board, it just it was so fascinating, interesting, and that ride home, my mind was just spinning.
Yeah, it was funny because you get home and all of a sudden it goes ring and it says you registered for the training program. And you were like, and I said, oh, you signed up. And you're like, well, I kind of have to now. He goes, how can you, how
Yeah.
can you walk away from that? And I was like, good for you.
Well, that's funny. It's like, it's like it kind of parallels what Guru Dave told me one time. He goes, once you're exposed to something like that, if you go back, now it's on you. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's kind of parallels what you just said there. You know what I mean? You get exposed to that, but you're like, now it's on you. You know what I mean? Because you had the opportunity to take advantage and stay over there, So,
Yeah. And some guys come and they say, oh, shine the light of combative truth on me. And then when you do, they go, oh, not that bright.
yeah, and I'm not ready for that.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna go back and put my head in the sand where I was because that was my comfort zone of where I
That was
feel
my
good about
safety.
myself. Right,
Yeah.
right.
Jeez. So now, and that all that was fascinating, and I just from the comments I'm reading, I know people are enjoying it. So from now, all right. So you kind of went to the fighting experience and sparring and all that.
And now
How
practice.
is a practice on a muck different than other methods?
Okay. Thank you for asking that. And now there's three elements there as well. There's the specific movement or technique that you're learning to do, whether it's an attack or a counter. There's the dynamics of that environment. And then there is the state of adaptation. Okay, because a lot of things guys talk about adaptation, but they don't build it too well. They do this counter thing, and it's just ridiculous. So I'll tell you how we do this. For instance, if somebody then says, well, okay, now that I've learned all of the tactics and I've learned dueling, so I've got some consequences, how am I going to improve my performance at each one of these? And I say, well, all right, let's go back to the very beginning. When you first learn your tactics, your attacking tactics were a single strike, a combo, fakes, or grabs. Traps are compounds of those two things, so that's a different category. So singles, combos, fakes, and grabs. Let's start with single strikes. Okay, so we stop moving around and say, well, let's isolate single strikes while we're sparring. So when I'm attacking at you, it's only singles and you're attacking at me. You can counter however you want, but you can only attack with single strikes. Now, when you're doing that, when you see an opportunity, you have to act on it. You see an available body part and you do something to it. You see an arm or the body or a leg or the head and you immediately bang, you hit it because you see that opportunity. And because you're
Correct.
acting very deliberately on those actions, you're actually building skill. Now, if we start moving around and on your own, you start going arm, body, leg, head, and the other arm and hitting the different targets, well, none of those are deliberate because you're kind of doing it when you want to, according to time. It's not deliberate.
Yes.
So instead, what we do is we might be moving around and fighting and isolating singles, and all of a sudden I'll go arm. And in that instant, you can hit the arm and I'll let you, and then we go right back to the fight. Or I might go body and you hit the body. So one of two things. Either the opportunity presents itself and you're deliberately hitting it on your own, or I'll give you the opportunity and then you have to very deliberately hit it on your own. In either
Right.
case, when I give you the opportunity, it permits me to make sure that you had a chance to work through all of the different targets Okay, so that there, and you can say, well, now I had a chance to actually practice my single strikes because I was able to hit all of those. And it wasn't just the ones that you were able to do because they afforded the opportunity in sparring. We get to very deliberately build in each of them and keep your action deliberate when you're doing it. You remember, you see an available body part and you do something to it. So
Correct.
targeting is the arm, the body, the leg, the head, or the other hand, the other arm. You cannot pick smaller invisible targets unless you have already taken dominion and control over them. And now those are decisional
Mm,
actions. So the way that you see something when you have a man who's moving in front of you and he's trying to hide those cues of his attacks, okay, that's the best you can target. So this is one of the ways that we would build, okay, our practice. We have the authenticity, okay, because we're in fighting mode. We have the context because we know we're working on single strikes and we know the
okay.
purpose of that activity. And you're being deliberate because you're hitting them deliberately on your own and deliberately when I call them out. So in that way,
Right,
we've
right.
maintained all three of those principles while you're practicing and getting better at doing your single attacks. So this is an example
Fantastic.
of how, and then you go through the same thing with your combos and then your fakes and then your grabs
And then your
and you go through
grabs
each
and
one.
right, right.
Okay. And
And then on the
so now let's follow up on that. Let's go to the training triangle. If a person then was doing single attacks, when they attack your arm, your body, your leg, or your head, they do so from one of the 8 directions, right? Vertical up, vertical
correct.
down, horizontal over and back, diagonal, one of the 8 directions. So what if we then said, well, okay, let's start moving around, and we're going to move around a lot more slowly, but still moving around almost like sparring where I get you and you get me. So there's still spontaneity. You still have to be attentive. You still have to judge distance and timing. All your recognition skills are built in, and recognition is huge. And with that, I'm going to say, okay, every time I go arm and I hold my arm up, I want you to hit it vertical down. Good. And now we go all around the 8 directions. Arm, 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 arm. And they work all the way around it. Body, leg. So now they've had to train to hit from all 8 directions that target. So wherever their hand might have been at the moment the opportunity presents itself, they're learning to hit those targets. That would be the training of the movement that support the single attacks. So now a person can fight with singles, they can practice with singles, and they can go home and train singles as well. And if you notice,
Okay,
those things are directly congruent, one feeding the next. There's no disconnect because the practice is just like the fight and the training is just like the fight. It's not
okay. I
somehow
remember
way
you.
different. All right. Because if all of a sudden I'm standing there and you're static and you're just still going through your moves, there's nothing about that that's attentive. There's nothing deliberate about that. You're just going through the motions.
Right, right.
Right. And
And,
so
no, I remember you. I remember you talking conversation with you that having that congruency among everything. You know what I mean? For the utmost functionality. Um, so I remember plenty of conversations in your garage about that.
well, that's how we remove those
Um,
functional disconnects that the other methods have because they have basketball footwork with football plays to play a soccer game instead of
yeah.
soccer footwork for soccer plays for a soccer game.
Game. Yep,
Okay?
yep.
Right. So that now those things are starting to appear. So now you can go, well, okay, I can see that. That looks like it. And when they're out there practicing, sort of looks like the game. And when I see them training, they're doing a lot of the stuff that I see in the game. What you don't see is big
Right, right.
differences from those 3 different activities. And in all of sports science, that relative law holds true. All right.
Yeah.
But in martial arts, it's significantly broken. So
Yeah.
if those
Matter of
functional
fact, I
disconnects were
remember you.
repaired, imagine how much better some of those fighters would have been. And here's another
Absolutely.
thing. People say, well, look at some of the great fighters that have come from those other systems. And my response to that is twofold. Those people are great fighters in spite of their methods, not because of it. And if those functional disrepairs were fixed, they would have been even better.
Even better. Yeah, interesting.
Right?
I remember.
So you can't point at a
Matter of fact, I
superstar.
remember.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I remember you making that comment that you look at like all these other, all these sports, regardless, soccer, football, baseball, what have you. But I remembered exactly this conversation you had with me in the garage because it really resonated with me. And you said, but the one art where lives are at stake, screw it up, and and what you just referenced, you know what I mean? You know, fascinating.
Well, that's what's driven AMOK all of these years. So we have a very different approach. It's truly tactical, okay? And the full-on tactics, you're fighting with tactics, you can identify them, you're using it all. Techniques are just a momentary expression of each one of those. We work those out, but the definition of a technique is the spontaneous assembly and application of movement. So the very
Movement.
nature of a technique is that it's born and it dies in a moment, because then there's another one, whether you're repeating it or not. So techniques come and go from moment to moment. Tactics are your intentions. Techniques are the actions that follow those. So,
Right.
again, most guys, they don't realize how their values dictate their strategies dictate their tactics, and their tactics are revealed in their actions and their techniques. And if you have
In their technique.
if you have any stripping between your values and your strategies, or your strategies and your tactics, okay, then or your tactics and your techniques, which is how you train for performance, well, then you're going to be lacking. You're not going to get best possible outcomes.
Yeah, that's what a method. No argument here, obviously. Obviously, being in the system and all that. What can you just explain? This is something we talked about in the past and all that. What is real time?
That's a good question, because a lot of guys say, well, we practice in real time. And I say, well, that's a good question. What is real time? Well, really going full on. And so the question I ask is real time consistent? And it's not, because real time will vary depending on how much momentum am I coming in with, has a lot to do with how much power is being delivered. Okay. The
Mm,
angle of my delivery and the tension of my arm, whether it's rigid and hard because I'm driving it in hard, or is it quick and snappy because it's jabbing, or is the arm fluid? Okay. And then we have to account for diminishment. What if a person comes in and you have hit them and now they're diminished, and even though they're giving you
right.
100% of their effort, it's not 100% of what it was. So if we don't also then say, if we don't learn how to adjust for real time, then you can't do everything in what would be the real time. I'll give you an example.
Uh,
Disarming. And then when a person's coming in at you and they're striking hard and fast and they're all over, you're never going to catch that hand and disarm them. And if
yeah,
some and if
it's
by some
really,
miracle and
really
if by some miracle you did,
difficult.
because they still have their wits in their other hand, they're going to take it away from you anyway.
Yeah.
So tenderization is the currency by which we purchase compliance. Diminishment is what I use so that I can gain control. So when you're coming in at me and I'm cutting
Mm,
your arm and I'm stabbing you or hitting you to the point where you slow down, so that when your strike is delivered, it's delivered with a speed and intensity at which I can catch it. Okay. And
right,
now I
right.
can do that. So the context of a disarm says, well, I can't even begin to trap or disarm or lock or takedown until I have already gained dominion and control. So what are the tactics by which I do that? So now if you want to practice disarming, when I'm attacking, I'm going to come at you full on. And every time you hit my arm or my body, I might come at you with a little bit less power and a little bit less every time you successfully hit me.
Okay.
So I might build in that diminishment so that the real time is actually changing as it would if you were using a real knife. Because if you're using a trainer, then there's no diminishment. You'll never bring me to the point where you could make a disarm.
Uh,
But it,
so with that being said, though, just one thing I wanted to insert. With that being said, then, is it fair to say you got to have some, good training partners that are going to give that to you, because that's, what I mean? Like I'm with you. I think it's fantastic. I agree totally with you. But you got to get some of these guys that take their ego and,
all right, well, look,
you know,
if you have a person who has an ego problem, they can't be a good practice partner anyways, because then
agree.
they're in there
Yeah,
for
yeah,
them. And
for
what they
sure.
do is they turn practice into opposition when they're supposed to be giving you
Mm,
something. And even if they're giving you a free, real-time freedom attack, so that you can work on that. They're actually supposed to be there helping you with the aim
No,
that
agreed.
with
No,
the
yeah,
right.
no,
But if
agreed.
somebody's not there playing the part that you need them to play to replicate the action that you need to work on, well, that's like having somebody read you lines to help you get ready for a play, but they won't read you the right lines. They're no good to you anyway.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Right. So
That's
they're no good to you anyway. And if somebody
yeah,
says, well,
yeah,
that's what I'd say on the street. Yeah, but right now we're kind of talking about this thing. All right. We're
yeah.
not free flowing that at that point. So again, when somebody has an ego problem, that's different than when because they don't know how to practice properly. And therein lies the other
Uh,
thing. What about when somebody's not a good practice partner because they don't know how to be? So it's really important that we can define the dynamics of practice from momentum, angle, tension, timing, and delivery, because in doing that, it allows us to define their behavior and to confine their behavior. So for instance, in a seminar, I was teaching how to deal with something when somebody's driving a full on thrust, trying to bury that blade into your stomach. And when I came around, this kid was like,
mm.
oh, well, it doesn't work. And I'm like, well, show me what you're doing. And he's attacking, he's going, and he's jabbing like this. I'm like,
Oh,
but you're
jeez.
doing a quick little timid jab. You're not giving him a hard committed strike. And then he said to me,
Right.
oh, I get it. If he doesn't attack you exactly the way you expect him to, it doesn't work. He goes, but I get it. I'll play the game. I said, no, no, wait a minute. Here's the deal. If you want to do it that way, you want to do those rules, let's play those rules. You can do anything you want. I'll do anything I want. Let's go. He goes, oh, I don't want to do that. I go, right. So if we're going to define one particular thing, look, what works against a straight punch doesn't work against a hook, right? Why?
Right.
Well, when the attack changes, the counter has to change.
Right.
So I said,
Yeah.
what you've done is you've changed the attack. He goes, no, it's still the same strike. And I go, no, because the quality of
No.
driving it in or quickly jabbing it in are two very different deliveries along the same line. Those are two very different strikes,
Hmm.
and I would manage them very differently. So this is why
Yeah, of
if we
course.
don't define the real time of specifically what kind of attacks we're working on, then people will tend to go off track or move on to something else and sometimes not even know it and then change the drill itself. Let me give you another perfect example. And this is so important because it has to do with that very point and recognition skills. How many times would it be, let's just say, for instance, that if I step in and punch and then you're doing a parry with a punch, and then I'm doing the attack and you're doing the counter, and people would say, oh, he's learning to block that punch and hit him back. And I would say, no, he's not learning that at all. Because if all of a sudden I step in, but I don't throw the punch, you'll kind of like do the move. And I'll say, why did you do that? And you'll say, oh, because I thought you were going to punch. I'll say, so in the end, you're not learning to block my punch and hit me back. You're learning when you see the cue of that punch to do
Ah,
that move. So it's kind of like
right,
you're not
right.
waiting. It's like hitting a baseball. You're not waiting for the ball to come. It's going to cross the plate. You have to read the pitcher. And so if your recognition isn't teaching you to read that cue for you to act on it, well, it's going to be too late anyway. So in the end, let's imagine that to make it deliberate, we break the timing. When I throw the punch, I move around and I throw that punch, and then I come back and then I'll wait and I won't throw it again with the same time. I'll throw it again. And each time I change the delivery. And then each time you very deliberately have to do the move. Ah,
Okay.
okay. Now you start. Then what if I start going, okay, you got the move, so let's save some time, and I'll just keep sticking my hand out, and you just keep doing the move over and over, and they start going, well, we did 1,000 repetitions. So do you see how they converted this drill, which was learning to recognize the move, and then that triggers your action into a timing drill. They completely changed that drill,
Ah,
and now it's not even being deliberate anymore. So there's no more skill development. There's just this mindless repetition, and they think they're doing more work.
gotcha.
So
Yeah,
this
wow.
is how good practices fall off track, become less deliberate or mindless reps, and in the end, they're wasting their time. Or their time could be far better spent doing other things that will
But
give them some
right.
skill.
Yeah. No, I mean, agreed. I mean, easy for me to say because I'm part of it, but hopefully others will. I'm hoping they will see what you're saying. Um, when you kind of touched on this before. How do you? But this is something before we hit go because I think it's important. How do you practice adaptation?
Ah, okay, thank you. Adaptation is really important because in a mock, it's not like saying, well, we're going to go learn more moves. It's about being more functional with the moves we have because we have all of them in the tactics. So the thing is, you're going to deal with different things that are going to happen when you fight. And so here's how we learn to adapt to all of those. Let's say, for instance, the first time that you're going through the core skills in a mock and you're learning, say, the single strikes. When you hit my arm, you hit the arm, and then immediately we're fighting again. And I might say body, and then you'll stab my body, and then I don't counter it, but immediately we're fighting again. And this is because,
Okay.
hey, when you're in the street, you punch somebody in the face, what will happen?
They're going to retaliate.
Well, they might go, ow, or they might go, bang. What's their recovery
Yeah.
time? What if their recovery time is instant? What if when you were fighting, you stabbed somebody and there was no immediate result and that they were still fighting you? That means that
You better adapt.
even when you're successful with your attempt, you
Right.
have to stay right on it and assume that there was no immediate result. So you go through all the
Okay,
core
right.
skills developing that. The second time you go through core skills, when I tell you, oh, stab, and if you hit my stomach on your own, or if I tell you stomach and you hit it, I might then go, oh, and then I'll come back to the fight. So I'll give you a momentary reaction. So now
Okay.
you might hit that stomach and you're going to keep your eyes open for continued activity. And all of a sudden you see a reaction, oh, and you're on it. You learn to recognize the opportunity and act on it.
Okay.
Aha,
Okay.
right. Because again, you see an available body part and you do something. You recognize an opportunity, you
Correct.
deliberately act on it. So in this case, when you're attacking and we're fighting and we're practicing, you won't know whether you're going to hit me and there'll be no immediate results, or if then there will be a result and you're going to have to act on it. So it teaches you
Okay.
to
So a constant
recognize and act
state.
on that, right? And the reason for that
Okay.
is both times, by the way, he failed. The first time, tactically, he failed to protect himself, which is why you were successful, even though there was no immediate result. And then he failed to
Mm-hmm.
protect himself, and there was an immediate result. Next time we're
Okay.
going through this, I might then say, okay, body. And when you go for the body, this time I will successfully parry or block. So you will have failed, not succeeded, because I didn't fail, I defended. So you're going to have to go around my defense to continue that
Okay.
action.
The
And
obstruction.
right.
Okay.
And so now as we're moving through this, either you get success with result or with no result, success with result, or you'll get failure because I defended. And all the way you're
Right.
adapting to each one. And by the way, at some point when you're moving through it and I say body, you kind of know I'm going to let you hit my body. It's just a question of what am I going to do about it? Well, what if when I
Right.
call
Right.
body, you go to hit it, all of a sudden I counter you? It'll make you surprised, right? Because
Of
since
course.
you had an expectation of being able to achieve it and then look for the result,
Sure.
right? So now what you get on your side of the equation is because he either fails or he defends or he counters, you learn to deal with success, okay, or his tactical defense, you can go around it, or you learn to deal with surprise because he countered. So these are these cycles of functionality. Success with no result. You come around success, acting on results when they occur.
Okay.
Then you come around again, acting on your failure because he defended himself, or coming around and acting and recovering from surprise because he countered. And all of these are staged and built in so that they all happen with authenticity and fighting. So it's a really
Ah.
reactive method. So people don't just go, well, you got to learn to adapt. Okay, how? What is the means by which we do that? Is that implied or it's supplied? Or is there just some kind of one simple adaptation drill? And you're not really learning to adapt to whether you're success or failed or whether you're surprised or any of those things. So they're all broken down and
Interesting.
built in. And that's why AMOK has cycles of functionality. You come around for the same information, but you can see things differently now and you can act on things differently because you have a higher level of skill. It's not about learning new moves. It's being much better at the moves you have.
Yeah. Right. Sure. Yeah.
Right. And
I just hope folks.
without those, you're
Yeah.
relegated to accumulating more drills because that's all you know how to do.
And more. Right. More
More.
stuff, and then and then becoming dysfunctional, like you alluded to before. You know, wow, this is fantastic. We're actually going beyond hour, but
Oh,
it's
okay.
been
Well, time up then.
no, but no. It's been phenomenal. So, I mean, I purposely, wanted to get all this stuff in 'cause it's just fantastic stuff. Um, is there any closing thoughts you had, sir?
Well, again, it really depends on the person's values. If they want to be a functionalist, then there are ways to achieve that. And you have to look at your method of integration, not your drills and your techniques, because your drills are just a means of gaining skill with those techniques. And most
Okay.
people, they learn those things combined. And if they can separate them, then they can start. Because even the Krav Maga instructors have said to me, "Oh my God, our Krav is so much better because we've learned how to train it. We've got a method that's more functional. We go through different levels of adaptation with our techniques now." They said the method has made our art come alive. And so that's what I would say to
Huh.
others, that if you want your art to be alive, to be spontaneous, and if you want to become more functional, you can alter the activities without having to change a lot of the content. But again, people, they're going to do what they want to do. It depends on their values. And if they're an enthusiast, they should go do what they enjoy. But if lives are at stake and
Right.
you're a functionalist, then there's only really one way to go at it.
And that's right. Yeah.
But listen,
Shalenta.
I want to thank everybody who came to listen to me yak with you today, and to thank you very much, Dean, for
No,
this
thank you for
opportunity to talk about
sharing.
AMOK.
Yeah. No, I mean, thank you for sharing. I mean, there were plenty of viewers, and yeah, this is be gold. So, and I'll be putting this up, of course, on YouTube, and obviously you'll have access to it to share it and all that. But I just, while I was talking to you once in a while, I glanced at the comments going down, and there were nothing but like the last one, Chalendo, no, keep going. This stuff is informational gold. Yes, it is.
We can do another one someday. If the guys want me to do it, I'm happy to do it
Oh my God.
anytime.
I would, well, personally for me, trying to get this channel up and going, all that, I would be honored to have you again and much appreciative since you were my first guest. And thank you for that, incidentally. Because I know you're a
Uh,
busy man. You could have said, yeah.
no, not for my brothers. Not for my brothers.
Yeah, that's
Right
what I
on.
know. That's what makes you so special. You know what I mean? Like you're not like somebody that's unattainable or you can't reach or you can't approach without having to go through like 10 layers of personnel or whatever. You know what I mean?
No,
And that's what's so amazing.
the only real filter is if you can suffer through my bad humor, then you're in.
I still got, hey, no images came out of those pics. You know what I mean? When I was asking a question.
Okay. Well, listen, I once again, I really want to thank everybody for joining us here tonight. The website is amok.global, not
Oh,
.com. It's amok.global. And if you go there, you can either get core skills if you're interested, and you can get the methodology, which is really what we were talking about. You can get the methodology video separate, just the method, so you can hear details about a lot of the things that we were discussing. And there's notes up there for you and all that other stuff. And at any time
yeah.
you have
And
questions, I'm pretty good about meeting with people on FaceTime to answer their questions too.
Oh, absolutely. I can vouch for that. And just to let everybody know, it's that website is just so informative. I highly recommend anybody who's watching this or has questions. I'd be more than happy to answer them as well as Tom. But just a wealth of information on that website. Everything that he was talking about, direct correlation to the website.
Yeah, and that five
Highly
dollars a
recommend
month,
everybody
that
go
five
visit.
dollars a month is really going to break the bank too.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh, Jalendo posted. Thank you, Jalendo. He posted the website.
Thank you,
Thank
excellent.
you.
Well, all right, guys.
But all right, sir. Thank
I don't
you.
want to keep everybody too long.
No. It's fine. I purposely went over because you were starting to really get into the real time, and I really wanted to cover the adaptation. So no, it went. It's fine.
Right
Perfect.
on.
You know.
All
All
right.
right. Thank you, sir.
Talk to you soon.
Salute you.
Bye bye.
All right. Hi.
All right, let's figure this thing out.
I could possibly hoping to get Burton Richardson. I'm going to be finding that out hopefully shortly. If not, I'm going to try to find who I can. Thank you for everybody watching. Jalendo, thank you. Marvin, thank you for subbing. John, Big John, thank you. Kogi, thank you. Who else here? Michael, thank you for watching. Yes, it was amazing. Richard, thank you. James Irvin, thank you. And all that. But again, so I'll be back next week. Again, I'm hoping to get Burton, but I'm going to find out. If not, I'll try to find somebody else. But again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.